Today's guest started out as a rabbi, then went to Wall Street, and now is all in on bringing those two worlds together. Rabbi Dr. Josh Joseph is the Executive Vice President and COO of the Orthodox Union, or the OU. Before that, he held a variety of management and operational roles at Yeshiva University. We spoke about servant leadership, bringing business skills to the Jewish community, and more. Before we begin, a quick reminder that if you enjoy Shark Tank and want to help us grow, please take a moment to leave a 5-star review, hit the subscribe button, and share your favorite episode with a few friends. My name is Yaakov Wolf, and this is Shark Tank. And I'm here in Yerushalayim with Josh Joseph, who has a background in business and has applied it over the last 10 plus years to Yeshiva University and the Orthodox Union. And so I wonder if you could start by just telling us how you got to there, your story and your journey with the business background, and then leading it back to the Jewish community.
So first of all, I want to say thank you to Yaakov for inviting me in today and for this conversation. I'm generally the one doing the interviewing and the questions. So the fact that somebody thought I was interesting enough to ask the questions, we'll see at the end if it's emes or not. But the topic that really brought me to the table is that I really wear these lenses that I see so much in Torah aligning with management. To the fact that I started a little thing called Mentch management, which sees whether it's the Harvard Business Review articles or the Columbia or this or that. The other thing are my experiences, my limited experiences in business, whatever it's been, that they align with Musar, they align with Torah, they align with the hashkafic approach that we take. And so it's an exciting opportunity for me to be here with you. And to the extent that I have anything to offer, I really appreciate my rebbeim, my parents, and then the people who've been able to help me to get to this point today. I think that's how we have to view everything, right? So we're sitting here as Avdei Hashem, as Kivyachol. I'm mindful that we're not exactly Eved Hashem. There are only a few people in Tanakh who are referred to as an Eved Hashem.
Aspiring Avdei.
Aspiring. Rav Aaron Lichtenstein Zatzal was my Rebbe, Rosh Yeshiva. He didn't want to put on his kever Eved Hashem, but he put Oved Hashem, right? So he's on the way. So I'm not even sure I could say that I'm an Oved Hashem, aspiring to be an Oved Hashem. But that kind of notion that all of what we're trying to share here isn't for my reasons, for your reasons, but it's l'hagdol Torah l'adira, and to help us find our pathway closer to Kasher to Kadosh Baruch Hu. So I didn't really answer your question. Right?
Yeah. So maybe tell us a bit about your first early career. You're starting out maybe closer to my age in your 20s, 30s. What were you thinking? What were your dreams as far as your professional career? What were you looking at?
I was actually working while I was getting smicha at Yeshiva University at RIETS, Elchanan Theological Seminary, and I was working as assistant rabbi, and I was running a kollel and doing an adult education program, sort of piecing it all together while I was doing a master's and doing smicha, right? Like one of these crazy things.
You had a family then?
I had a family. I was married. We were just having we just had our first child, and It was exciting and it was wonderful, and it sort of hit me that I wasn't sure that being a rabbi was what I wanted to do. And I recalled growing up as the son of a rabbi saying, I never want to do this. So what happened was, here I was in Manhattan, and there were friends of mine who were doing quite well. 1998, 1999, stock market was ripping, and a couple of friends said, hey, why don't you join us? Why don't you come aboard? And so, I wanted to start sort of at the bottom and learn my way. And Baruch Hashem had a little bit of success in the beginning, learning how to trade, and trying to stay and keep aligned with the mission that I had set for myself of being, trying to be an Oved Hashem. And it was an interesting balance, right? Because as much as I had learned in yeshiva for many years, I had learned in Yeshiva Arts for 4 years, and I'd been in YU, and it was getting smicha. I was on the way or finishing smicha, which eventually Baruch Hashem I was able to do. Working in a different kind of environment was not pashut. To quote Yakir Hexter, Zichrono Livracha, nicht pashut. It's not so simple. And there were certain kinds of things and behaviors and languages that sort of entered into your day-to-day life.
Can you give an example?
Yes, there's a story that our son, we had one son, and then our second son was born. We moved out to the 5 towns, and at one point our older son said a word, and I turned to my wife and I said, "Where did he learn that from?" And she gave me a look. I said, "Well, I don't understand. Well, how could that be?" And my wife is much smarter than me, and she explained that from her perspective, the language that they speak on the trading floor and in certain places wasn't exactly English. It's curse. So I got a jar. I remember where I saw this. Somebody suggested it. I got a jar, and so anytime I said a word or somebody pointed out that I said a word, mostly it was me, I would put a little tzedakah in whatever I had in my pocket into the jar, and it started to add up, and they already called me the rabbi, which was not a positive line. And people started to make fun of me. Oh, here I'm trying to be all righteous and do these things. And then there was the day where I lost a large amount of money. Back then it was a large amount of money. It looked like potentially $1 million loss on a trade. And, there are these long tables and, long rows, and just like one office in the corner. And, I sort of knew right away, and door in the corner opens, boss comes out, steam coming out of his ears, starts walking down. The place, which is really loud, goes pretty quiet. I stand up. If I had a box, I'd start packing it. I had a bag, and I'm starting to put my stuff in there. And I don't remember if I had my hand on the stucco box on the curse jar. And he starts coming and he starts letting me have it. Every word that I had heard before and not heard before. And he's, sort of gesturing with his hands, and the spittle, I remember flying on my face. And, I particularly remember that because I'm a little bit of a germy. I was looking for Purell everywhere, And I'm like, that's what my mind is on. And meanwhile, it's still going on, right? And he finally, gestures and he points with his hand right at the curse jar. And he sighs. And he whips out his wallet. He takes out a $100 bill, shoves it in my face, slams it in the jar, and says, "Now don't do that again." Turns around, walks to his office, closes the door. The next day, everybody had a curse jar everywhere, right? I went to him later. Baruch Hashem was able to have some success. And I went to him another time, and I said, how come you just didn't fire me? He said, "I had just paid you a lot of money to learn an important lesson. Why was I going to let somebody else be the beneficiary of that?" And there's a lot of mussar in that. Wherever you're managing, it's a for-profit, not-for-profit, a trading firm, high-tech, wherever you are, marketing, you're going to work with people. They're going to make mistakes. How do they learn from mistakes? How do you learn from mistakes? How do you grow? Do you show some accountability, of course, but do you also say, okay, now don't do it again, learn from the mistake and grow forward and give them that opportunity to grow? And I think it's an interesting opportunity that we have when we're managing and when we're leading, when we're being executives, no matter the kind of thing. Could be you're the rabbi of a shul, could be you're the head of school, a teacher, whatever, whoever you're managing. It could even be in your family and the roles you play within a family, roles you play within friendship circles. The opportunity to allow people to make mistakes and recover from them and give that kind of feedback. These are lessons that I don't think we learn enough in schools. I don't think we focus enough in families. And so when you can take it from a business school, from a management, from one of these books that I like to read, the sort of management or self-help books, whatever they're called, I think that there's a lot of Torah in them. And I think there's a lot of deep mussar for us to take from.
So just to take a half a step back, the pivot from being an assistant rabbi to being in the trading floor, from within the context of it being an aspiring Oved Hashem, is l'chora a little bit puzzling, because the most natural path for a Ben Torah and Oved Hashem who really wants to keep that central is to go into the rabbinate, and yet you sort of stepped in the other direction. So what exactly led you to make that move?
I think there are a few things. It's a great question. Robert K. Greenleaf, he wasn't the founder of this sort of machshava, this sort of approach, but he's given a lot of credit for naming it servant leadership. And I think one of the struggles I had with becoming, like the next step for me was becoming a rabbi, the rabbi. And here I was in a pretty prominent shul in Manhattan, and like there was a lot of eyes. It felt like being in a fishbowl, people looking at me, and I wasn't fully comfortable. There are times I'm still not fully comfortable being that person out front and that voice. Just last night, I had the opportunity to be at NCSY Kollel, and they invited people in from the outside because 4 of the major YU Rosh Yeshiva, 4 of our Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Schachter, Rav Rosenzweig, Rav Tursky, and Rav Sobolovsky were speaking, and Rabbi Benovitz, who runs NCSY Kollel, asked me to close. And in yesterday's daf, Basra Chaf Beis, there's a story about somebody who comes from afar. Rosh Yeshiva comes from afar, and he wants to sell some of his wares. And they ask him a shaila to test his knowledge. So I felt like the elephant that had just eaten a reed box, let alone the rabbi who was asked whether it's tameh or tahor, right? So like there's I think genuine feeling like I'm a servant leader. I'm here to help others, and I believe that that's what Rabbanim are about. It wasn't necessarily my experience at the time, and so instead of finding the right place, which 6 months later, after I had left Wall Street, after I had left Rabbanus and I was on Wall Street, that opportunity actually came up, and I had just started this other thing, so timing always important. But I ran. I instead of running 2, I think it was Rosenzweig who was asked about making Aliyah, and he said, "Don't run away from, run to." And I've had many mentors in my life, Baruch Hashem, and one of the capital M mentors was President of Yeshiva University, Richard Joel, who I had the great bracha to spend a lot of time with, a lot of years with. And that was a big thing for him always. Don't run away from. Think about where you want to go, chart your path, and run to.
And did you feel you did that when you went from the Rabbanus to Wall Street, or you're running from?
Absolutely not. Look, there was definitely an attraction of being able to make money. There was definitely an attraction to making a pivot where I could feel good about myself, provide for a family. Here I was, I had 1 kid, 1 on the way, it's a long conversation I had. I don't know if I have his permission to say his name, but one of my old long friends who, it's such a long friendship, we don't know the origin story of how we met, and he's a popular, famous guy, Charlie Harari, and we've had this debate going back 25 years. Where can you provide more benefit as a somebody within doing klal work from the inside, the rabbi, the teacher, the head of school, the organization, or the balabas sitting across the table, who's the partner, who's the chair of the board, who is the who gets up like he does and inspires, because here's a businessman who's talking Torah, who's inspiring, and so it's a good shaila. And so I saw it not necessarily as a complete lahavdil Yonah Hanavi, like running and running away from my tafkid, but that, okay, if it would take me a few years to build up, provide for my family, but then also be able to give back, from sitting across the table. So it was a little bit of that, but there was definitely, a piece of this isn't for me, let me find something else.
Right, so you mentioned 2 factors which I think come up a lot in these conversations, which is money, salary, income, and feeling good, self-fulfillment, stuff like that. And when I thought myself a little bit about going into more full-time Jewish communal work, nonprofit work, those 2 things I hear a lot from mentors and other people, which is that you're not going to make as much money. And oftentimes there's a lot of politics, and community work has a lot of these things which can make it very draining. So maybe start with just how you ended up back from Wall Street, back in the world of Jewish communal work, and then we can discuss a little bit more about these broader issues of what may or may not drive people in that field.
So first of all, again, we're talking about my wife, who's a tzadeka. So the year that I went from working, in finance to working for the not-for-profit, I was audited the following year by the IRS because they couldn't believe the difference, the delta between what I was making one year and what I was making the next year. So Baruch Hashem for Julie. But it's not true. It's not true. It's not emes. YU did a study through the Azrieli School, I believe, a year or two ago, about why people don't go into chinuch, and money wasn't the number one reason. And we know that whether the number now is 9 or 17, it's in that range of how many head of school positions are available in North America right now. And those head of school positions start at $200,000-$300,000 and go higher. Executive director positions in schools. So it's not exactly being the Rebbe in the classroom, that's true, but there are positions in chinuch that are paying real significant dollar amounts that are empty. So it's not just a dollars and cents thing. And I understand in Eretz Yisrael it's a completely different thing. So my knowledge base is more about sort of the American community. Although I have more to say about the opportunities here in Israel for us to grow in the Anglo-Israeli, especially in the Anglo-Israeli community, but beyond as well. Take a step back, I guess. The life of a hedge fund can be really incredible highs and can be really incredible lows. And your highs are never as high. I think there's a football, maybe it's Tom Brady, who said the thrill of victory is nowhere as deep as the disappointment of defeat. That's true when it's your parnasa on the line. Aside from the learning a different language story, I remember there was a Shabbos where there was a deal that I was working on that was supposed to close at 4 o'clock.
Friday.
Erev Shabbos, and the deal was delayed. And Shabbos was like one of the earliest Shabbos. Shabbos was starting 4:10, 4:11, something like that. And we're sitting there in the office, waiting. We had a Long Island office, so it was a quick ride home during the 18 minutes. Nothing. And I remember sitting there all Shabbos, and it was a deal that I had suggested, recommended, and I'm sitting there with a pit in my stomach all Shabbos long, and I could barely daven, I could barely think about anything but the money. And Baruch Hashem, 30 seconds after Shabbos ended, according to the most Mekel Zman, I was on the computer trying to figure out what had happened. Baruch Hashem, it worked out, but it wasn't Shabbos. And so the combination of that, and then my wife had been sick. She had been diagnosed with cancer. Baruch Hashem, she got through it, and she's still here. 15 years later, and almost 20 years later, thriving. So Baruch Hashem. But there was there's a lot in life that requires your energy, and so much energy for me, I felt, to be drawn into my job and to cause emotional distress. I figured I needed that. Maybe I had overcorrected from sort of not sticking with Rabbanus in that frame, and I had overcorrected in the other direction. And so I schmoozed with a lot of mentors, and I schmoozed with a lot of people. And one of my mentors, a guy by the name of Frank Luntz. Frank Luntz, he's a Republican pollster. He's a pollster in general. In 1992, he got famous because he was the one pushing Ross Perot as the third-party candidate. He's still very known today. He's a pollster, and he should have refuah shlema. He was speaking. I was working on Wall Street. He was speaking to a group from the Conference of Presidents of Major Jewish Organizations about some findings he had done about the Jewish community, and he invited me to come. And so I come, and I sneak in the back, whatever it is. And he's about to start. He says, "Is Josh here?" He's not talking about, it's the Conference of Presidents of Major Jewish Organizations. He's not referring to me. "Josh Joseph, are you here?" I sort of raised my hand, and he says, "Stand up." Okay, stand up. And I feel like the lights were out, and there's a spotlight on me. I don't know if that was MS, but that's my memory. And he's like, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Josh Joseph. He works on Wall Street. He didn't say the word busha, but it's a shame he should be working for one of you." I walked out of there that day with 9 business cards from like Hillel and Yeshiva University and all these different places. And, it made me think, about, what I wanted to do. And maybe this is an interesting sort of compromise. Like, in other words, I can bring some of my businessy stuff, and I can be doing work for the klal, and maybe this is a pshara, maybe this is a way forward. So like that, all of those combinations, lots of conversations with my wife and others, Rebbeim, and sort of that's what led to that jump.
And our podcast had this chus of speaking to Rav Asher Weiss, and he actually mentioned this as a sort of like lechatchila. You sort of said it's like a compromise. He said it's lechatchila. We have the business world, we have these Torah organizations, and so why not take that and apply it full time with all of your energy, or your main source of parnasa and time should be in that space. And my sense is that it's underrated for people to take that direction. Do you agree with that?
He's 100% correct, and I would love to. I got to go listen to that one. Because today that's what we believe. That's what we're doing. I wrote a white paper that I think a person has read maybe once, but it's called The Pipeline for Leadership for the Jewish Future. And it's something that I believe in wholeheartedly. And whether you become a professional within the organization, the Jewish world, again, that can include Klei Kodesh, right? And it can include, again, Richard Joel's term, Lay Kodesh. Whatever you're doing, we need to train people. We need to get them excited about being involved in the Jewish community. That's our avoda. That whether it's Askanim or Balabatim, involved in shuls and schools and in organizations. We have an achrayus now to grow that pipeline, starting. We have incredible NCSY advisors, even teens already taking on leadership roles, whether it's at home in schools and things like that, through the advisor pipeline into collegiate experiences and growing them forward. We started a fellowship. We used to have a fellowship at YU called the Presidential Fellowship, and now we have one at the OU called the Executive Fellowship, where we're growing, helping people to understand what it means to work for the klal, giving them skills and giving them the tools. And really, I agree with Rav Asher. Not that he needs my askama, but it is a lechatchila. It's I think an ideal way to live your life. And if you have a cheshek for some of these things, it's really an opportunity. There's a concept called EOS, and it's entrepreneurial or operating system. And there's the author of the book, Dino Wickman. Okay, he's written a couple of books. He has written Traction, which is called Get a Grip on Your Business, and another one called Rocket Fuel. I think it's in Rocket Fuel that he points out that 35% of leaders, when they do the testing, have what's called the visionary gene, right? Meaning they can be visioning. What percentage of leaders have what he calls the integrator gene, the ability to implement that vision? Let the people listening, try to guess. You can guess too.
I'm assuming it's a lot less.
5.5%. Oh. So you take somebody who is a good doer, who understands, who can learn, who can pick things up. Sometimes you might call them a generalist, right? But just knows how to get stuff done. That is needed in the Jewish world, right? You have incredible rabbanim with incredible ideas that aren't happening. And so we need to channel that kind of vision and that leadership and that strategy, but you also need people who can get things done and implement and make them happen. So I think that there's a real benefit to having people with those skill sets and that training, and growing those skill sets and growing the training in order to help move the Jewish people forward.
And you mentioned before that the money piece you think is a bit of a myth, and maybe if there's some resources we can put in the show notes about if people want to learn more about that. Are there any other barriers to entry that people think and are maybe misconceptions as to why people don't consider this enough?
Yeah, I think the biggest barrier to entry is, unfortunately, the Shabbos table discussions. Oh, your son-in-law's a rabbi? Sorry. Right? Especially in the modern community. I think one of the many things that the yeshivish community gets, that the Haredi community in Israel, I think, gets in different ways, and obviously it's a challenging time from that perspective as well, is to be machshiv, mesiras nefesh, for avodas hakodesh. And I think sometimes we get caught up in the modern world, like, sort of lawyer, business, doctor. In the YU sense, the Torah Mada, the Mada ends up being this stuff. Oh, my daughter's a doctor. My son's a lawyer. Whatever it is, my daughter-in-law is a bigwig in high tech. Whatever it is, as opposed to my son's a Rebbe. My daughter is an administrator at a seminary. Like these are huge avodas, and we have to give some better. Covet is too strong a word again. Like shy away from that because I don't think that's the reason you should do it. But we should encourage people that this is a pathway and speak of them highly, and not chas v'shalom sitting around a table be blasting every teacher and every rebbe and. There may be valid reasons, they didn't get the training, but we have to give them the training, we have to give them the kochos, and we got to support them in better ways with our language as well.
So we're recording this in the summer, and I was just speaking to a young man last week. He's finishing Shana Bet at one of the American yeshivas here, and we're talking about what he's doing next year and what his chaverim are doing next year, and we're talking about the phenomenon, not at all a new one, of guys sort of flipping out. They go from these yeshivas to Ner Yisrael, to the Mir, they end up taking on a more right-wing lifestyle. And we were talking about this phenomenon, and one of the things that he mentioned that we're discussing is the fact that these young people, they feel that the centrist community, the YU community, lacks in what you were discussing, the kavod of Torah, the commitment to Talmud Torah. So first of all, just what do you think about that phenomenon in general? And then maybe we can talk about some suggested solutions.
Yeah, look, I'm not a big generalization guy. I think it's Kierkegaard, to paraphrase, who says, if you label me, you negate me. And so I'm very wary of that. That's number one. Number two, I just came last night from the NCSY Kollel, as I mentioned, and you have 300 modern Orthodox boys who are sitting there in the summer. There's some basketball, right? But they're learning, and the air conditioning is questionable in Beit Meir, where it's hot, and this is what they're doing for the summer. And people come back summer after summer, and they actually grow advisors and people who end up going to YU and going to Smicha and things like that. So, and Mechanchem and people who are Zionist and come to Israel. Like there's some wonderful movement in that direction too. I'll speak of JLIC also. This is not an advertisement, but we're on 24 campuses in the United States and Canada, and we're in another 11 couples who are here in Eretz Yisrael. And there are people who care about Torah and who are learning Torah and who are growing closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I think there's a lot of positive movement in that vein, in that direction. So I wouldn't want to just say that everything and everyone is moving away. I don't think that's accurate, and I don't think it's fair, and I don't think it captures some of the really positive momentum within our sort of core community. That said, we could be doing better. That said, we could be doing more. I talk about the denominator. Okay, so NCSY reaches 31,000 teens in a year, which is phenomenal. According to the last Pew study, there are 298,000 teens in sort of the United States of America in the high school age. Now, obviously, not all of those are Orthodox or the catchment that you're speaking about. But what I speak about is the lashon of Dan Sullivan, who's like the coach of coaches. Are we living in the gap? Or are we living in the gain? So if you're living in the gap, you say we're at 31. We're only at 10%. If you're living in the gain, we've got 31,000, we could get to 298,000, right? They have the opportunity to grow. And I think that's probably the frame that we have to look at modern Orthodox, a centrist Orthodox community, that we have a lot of positive momentum, and yet there's a long way to go. We have a lot more to do with our sort of core populations in engaging people with the Ribono Shel Olam. And, schools are amazing. Our school system is fantastic. And yet every single person you speak to, and every single person there, I go with the generalizations, they'll tell you what's wrong with this school, and what's wrong with that Rebbe, and what's wrong with this Mora, and what's wrong with this head of school, and they don't do this, and it's, this, and they have even accurate complaints, not inaccurate. But you can't blame it on the school system alone. What about the parents? Well, the parents are busy. They have children. They have jobs. They have sandwich generation and dealing with their parents and their own relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And, So here I am giving you like the list of complaints. What's the antidote? So I can only speak about my Dalit Amos, my experiences, right? And it doesn't necessarily work for everybody, but I switched shuls a couple of years ago, and the shul I had been in for 20 years, incredible mentor and Rebbe, Rabbi Yeshua Kalish. And one of the first shilas I asked him when I moved to the Five Towns, I moved to Lawrence. He's the father of Rabbi Daniel Kalish, who's known for Waterbury, also phenomenal talent. But one of the first questions I asked him is like, I have two boys, and we also, Baruch Hashem, have a daughter who's made Aliyah. But at that point, I had two boys, 5 and 3 years old, and I said, should I push them to come to shul? And his answer was, they'll tell you. Okay. So they get to be teens, and they still haven't told me. A couple years ago, I went to a shul, another shul in the neighborhood. Somebody encouraged me to come. The Rebbe's Rabbi Yossi Zakatinsky, Chamavak Hashem. And I said, I'm going to go there one day for Rosh Hashanah. Invited my boys to come. And walking there, I said to them the same thing I'd said to them for 20 years. We're going to go. You want to stay for 15 minutes, and then you leave. You come back. You don't come back. No judgment. Wonderful. My older son turns to me, likes to know things, what the Seder Hayom is. What time is it going to be finished? Good question for Rosh Hashanah. I said, I don't know, maybe 12, 1 o'clock. Who knew? At 12:30, we're dancing around Joey Newcomb, who is not yet begun Musaf. And my older son, with a smile on his face, turns around and looks at me and says, we ain't getting done by 1 o'clock. And I said, again, defensively, I said, you can leave anytime. He goes, I never want to leave. I want to come back tomorrow. And we came back and it became a new shul. And Rabbi Kalish called me. I was a regular 3 times a day, whatever, learning with him. Where'd you go? I said, Rabbi, you told me. My children will tell me when it's time. I told him the story. He says, okay. But don't be a complete stranger. Come back sometimes. Okay, Baruch Hashem, so I go back sometimes. A few months later, I developed a relationship with Rabbi Zakatinsky. And I went to him and I told him the story. And I'm like, how do you explain it? He says, Josh, it's not them. It's you. They saw you and how you were interacting with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and how you were interacting, how you were singing, how you were davening, how you were dancing. And when you got into it, they got into it. And I think that's an important lesson for our community. We can blame the schools, we can blame this, we can blame that. If the home is engaged in getting closer to Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Ribono Shel Olam, you're working on Wall Street, and you have a jar. You have a deal over Shabbos, but you know what? You put it aside and say, I'm going to do a Garlagra, and I'm going to sit and learn for 6 hours, and I'm going to learn with my kids, and I'm going to focus. As hard as it is, if we can model and represent trying to be an Oved Hashem, trying to get closer to Kadosh Baruch Hu, to daven, to learn, I think that's the greatest hashpah that we can have on the next generations.
That's very profound. It's one of the really core ideas that has driven me to start this podcast, is that I've always felt, just for example, when my wife and I are looking for a community to move, I always try to inquire, is it a Torani community? Is it a serious community? And the answer is always the same. The schools, the Tehillim for the kids, the kids, and the kids. And I always ask them, what about the adults? And this podcast is meant to sort of address that space of, well, we have these wonderful institutions that lead you from the cradle till 23. And then what? So I think it's very profound the way you formulated that. And it sort of leads me to another question, which is, there's a lot of talk in the business world about this idea of work-life balance. Is it a myth? Is it true? How do we define it? How do we talk about it? So given all your experiences, and you've touched on it a number of times, what's your take on this, on the discourse around work-life balance? Because it obviously leads to being available and having the space in your life to give time and energy and passion to your Avodas Hashem is connected to that discussion. So I'm happy to hear some of your thoughts.
I was once asked to speak on work-life balance, and I suggested that they speak to somebody who knows what they're talking about. I've heard different things. It shouldn't be called work-life balance, because work is part of your life, and that goes back to the other question about if you're working in Avodas Kodesh and you're trying to get closer to the Kadosh Baruch Hu, there's more pathways that way, right? Sometimes there's challenges too, but sometimes there's more pathways through a life that's dedicated in a work that is a life. That said, I think it's Aristotle, but I've spoken to a number of philosophy, Gaonim who are not sure that it is. So that there are several ways that we can engage with the world. Pies, I call it pies. Physical, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual. You can want to add an S, social, whatever it is, right? And I guess that would make it spies, but I'm not sure if that's the right lashon. But so I think when you're trying to come up with what should my life be made up of? How much time am I spending in the office? I'm going to only spend this much time. It's not realistic, especially with these devices, right? If you have an unkosher phone, especially, right? It's calling you all the time, and you actually see on mine. My case says Einod Milvado, so I remember if I'm picking it up that it should be for a higher purpose. Those little reminders, by the way, I think those cues. I forgot to mention that in my parsha last week. The cues that give you habits. If you're opening up, if it says Einod Milvado on your phone and you're opening it up, more likely that you'll look at a all daf or an all parsha, whatever it is, whatever the form of learning is, than just scrolling through whatever you scroll through.
Anyway, Manuel Feldman wrote a great column once where he said every morning he wakes up and he presses A, and then on his browser it offers him all daf or Atlanta Braves. He's from Atlanta, and he always has to make that choice.
That's a great. I love that. Okay, I have to remember that one. But if you can remember that there are these other things, right? So I get made fun of a lot. But Baruch Hashem, that's very helpful, by the way, is put yourself in situations where people are making fun of you. I talk about running. I talk about it a lot, and I love it. I didn't. I hated running until I was 40 years old. And then my dad got sick, and he was a big runner, and he couldn't run anymore. So I was like, okay, I'm going to try. And I did it one time, and I thought I was going to die first. And I'm not sure I should joke about that, but it was very painful. And then now I love it. And it's the physical. You have to make time. You have to make time. People say, "Oh, you find time." You have to make time for this stuff. Intellectual. What are you doing? What are you reading? You could pick up this. You could pick up that. But when you're reading, when you're approaching, can you get a degree? I got a doctorate in my 40s. It's crazy, right? It's insane. I was working, and how are you focusing intellectually? And some of that obviously is Torah learning, right? So I turned to 40, and I said, by the time I turn 50, I want to learn Kol Torah Kula. Okay, I'm a couple of years behind, but I'm getting there, right? So what are you doing for your intellectual engagement, emotionally? What are you doing spending time emotionally with your spouse, if you're lucky to have one, with your family? Is there a chisaron that you have? I give a shir on anger management, right? Which is Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Breaks the luchos, right? Asher shibarta, the Gemara says, yasher kochacha. So there's anger, right? Sometimes we see expressions of anger, and sometimes it's appropriate. The question is the mafarshim there, was it right? Was it not right? Should he done it in anger? Goes into this whole sugya. But how are we thinking about working on our emotions? Maybe, and for many people in Orthodox Caucus and beyond, having a relationship with a therapist, that's an important thing to make time for. And then, of course, spiritual, right? So, are you making time for davening? Are you making time for learning? Are you making time for doing chesed? Are you making time for these things? So, when the work life, I don't know. But if you can say, I am making time for each of these things, then willy-nilly, you don't have the opportunity to work 24/7, because you have to make time for this. You have to make time for that. You have to make time for this. And so I think for me, that's been the best way to be able to do forward. And I'm terrible at it, right? In other words, I have to be reminded, take a vacation, right? I have to be reminded by my wife, hey, remember us? I'm not good at it. But the little good that I have is because I set up this sort of mental model for myself of management of like, okay, I'm going to spend time with family. I'm going to spend time running. I'm going to spend time learning. I'm going to spend time davening. And you set those times out, and it helps a little bit to pull you away from sometimes the draw that work can be.
And going back to what you were talking about before, the hedge fund and the Wall Street lifestyle, do you think that people in our community should be trying to move away from that because it's really not conducive, as you mentioned?
I don't know. I think actually some of my friends who get to my stage, and like some people are working, 24/6, 24 beyond, but there are those who they get to a place and they're able to, I don't know what dentists for some reason, right, that are able to learn a Seder, and arrange their dental practice. I don't know. I love my dentist, but like I spend most of my time with my dental hygienist. So I guess maybe that's when the dentist is learning. I'm with the hygienist. I don't know how it works, but like there are definitely careers where you can make that balance and create that balance, and even more so sometimes than the klal, because the klal like and you're called to the next thing, and there's the next crisis, and there's the next issue that you have to deal with, and like. I could go home now, but like, what about the 4 people who I'm serving in a food kitchen? Like, like they have to eat too. So I think sometimes it's even harder in klal work to be able to make that clear separation. So I'm mindful of that. You need both. Right, to again use the Richard Joel term, you need the Klei Kodesh. You also need the Lei Kodesh. You need that balance, and those jobs provide that kind of opportunity. And I wouldn't want to walk away minimizing that.
So maybe let's talk a little bit about Eretz Yisrael. We're here in Yerushalayim, and the OU has obviously been doing a lot of work for many years down the block from here in the OU Israel Center, and there's continued growth there. So what are you seeing now as far as the opportunities for Anglos who are making Aliyah or are here already, and what's on the horizon?
Yeah, so the juxtaposition of sitting here in Yerushalayim and in the middle of an Eis Tzara. And, Achinu Kol Beis Yisrael, and our minds are first, again, as Rav Ronsweig pointed out last night, our minds should first and foremost be on those who are shvuyim, mamish, and those who are in tremendous pain, those who are niglim, that we know about. But even sometimes the siblings of those who maybe who have been killed or who are missing, and it's
all the ripples, the cousins, grandparents,
even the friends. It's a painful time, and if there's any way that we can be supportive, that we want to be supportive for the effort. And chas v'shalom to do anything that takes away from that or focuses in other kinds of ways. One of the pivots we've been making at the OU, we're the Union of Orthodox Congregations, Jewish Congregations of North America. North America, what are we doing in Israel? We've been here for a long time. But one of the pivots that we have been seeing, not just because of population, but because of need, is that the Anglo-Israeli community seems to have, or communities, I don't know that you can call it one big C community, seem to have needs. And so a number of years ago, 10 years ago, Thanksgiving 10 years ago, we started NCSY in Israel. And we're in 5 different towns doing all kinds of programs with Anglo-Israelis. And Baruch Hashem, it's grown from the first Shabbaton that had 20 participants to a recent one that had 180 with a waiting list. Seems like there are needs, right? 6 years ago, we had one campus couple at IDC Reichman in Herzliya. We now are about to announce our 11th couple, okay? And that's not just on university campuses, but also in communities. We have one now in Yerushalayim, a couple, Tibbetz. Last Monday night, I was in Tel Aviv at the 126, the shul on Ben Yehuda Street in Tel Aviv. Unbelievable. It was 90 schmoiling degrees in there. I'm not sure what they consider air conditioning or not. And, Rabbi Joe Wolfson ostensibly it was going to be an hour, it was 2, and they're sitting there, and they are Yodei Sefer, and they are learning, and they are steiging. And I went over to them afterwards, and some of them were clearly Anglo-Israelis, and some of them were Israelis. And I asked all of them, like, why you come here? And the notion of community and belonging, and a place for those who are maybe sometimes more comfortable in English, although Rabbi Joe gives his drasha in Hebrew Shabbos, on Shabbos. And so there is a notion of integration as well. But the opportunity in the university community, in the young professional community, in the teen communities, and then in some of our towns that we know that have a lot of Anglos, what are the needs? How can we be helpful? Who's out there doing things already that are interesting and exciting that we can help? Or just get out of the way, let them do their things. We're not looking to step on toes, looking to potentially partner and those kinds of things. So that is really an area, understanding more of what the communities are like and what the needs are, and where we can possibly be helpful. For me, that's it's almost messianic, not to sound too grandiose, but like the notion of an American aliyah, right? Like Baruch Hashem, for good reasons, bad reasons, Russia, Paris, Yemen, Ethiopia, right? Like there's still more that can come from all of these places.
They were all running from, and the Americans are running too, in general.
That's the lashon, right? And it's complicated. You can sell a beautiful home in Teaneck with a pool and not be able to afford a 3-bedroom apartment in Ramat Beit Shemesh. I don't know. It might be exaggerating. I don't know the numbers, but it's not simple. It's not simple. But this notion of Mesiras Nefesh is an important one for a greater idea and a greater ideal. So the question is how the OU's Kochos aren't going to be to help provide affordable housing, but the OU's Kochos might be to help, grow the community Limud Torah. To provide places for teens that are ruchni and that help them get closer to Kadosh Baruch Hu, communities for some of these younger people.
When I made Aliyah, I went to the Nefesh offices, and they were back in Givat Ze'ev, and there was a sign up. There was a boy playing Little League, and it said, "I made Aliyah, and my biggest sacrifice was moving from shortstop to third base," which for me was sort of true, and give credit to Nefesh and my parents and a lot of other resources that made that a very smooth transition overall, Baruch Hashem. And I think it's already very interesting to think about the trajectory, and hopefully we'll continue to see great things coming from all the different actors who are helping people live fulfilling, happy lives here in Eretz Yisrael, for the people who, like me and you, came from an American cultural background. So let's maybe finish off a little bit about the Netziv. We both have an affinity for the Netziv. You have a great weekly podcast about the Netziv's Torah and the Parsha. And I think the Netziv is a fascinating figure. I think maybe people from our community enjoy the fact that he's obviously, you can see from his parish, he's broad, he's a Rosh Yeshiva, but he clearly is with it with regards to society and politics and stuff like that. You sense that at different places in his parish. And so I'm wondering if you can tell a little bit about your fascination with the Netziv, and maybe share with us some parting thoughts from the Netziv that might be relevant to our discussion today about living life as a Ben Torah in the workforce.
Yeah. So look, it's a personal relationship. Rav Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, just an interesting thing that he had 2 sons. Okay, one was Rav Chaim Berlin. Okay, and who's Rav Chaim Berlin? Incredible yeshiva that came out. He had another son who was Rav Meir. Just last night in Beit Meir with the NCSY Kollel. But he changed his name to Bar Ilan. And that's where we got Bar Ilan University. And so you think about this great yeshiva, and you think about this great university. All my years at Yeshiva University. My father, who was also Talmud of Rabbi Soloveitchik Zatzal, who was Talmud of the Rav, and quoted him all the time, at some point in his life, got connected to the Netziv. And this became his weekly passion, that every week from his stellar, he was the rabbi of the Spanish and Portuguese Synagogue of Montreal, the oldest congregation in Canada. And he was there for 40 years as the Rav. And he would quote the Netziv often, to the point that we made fun of him. So now I quote the Netziv every week, and everybody makes fun of me, which is great. But he at one point started, we encouraged him, like, you're translating it anyway, because sometimes he would write out his sermons. Do a translation. Do a weekly something. So he sent out an email weekly for almost 2 years, that translates some piece of the Netziv and would expound upon it. And we have all of that. Thank my brother Ami for holding on to it. And when my father was nifter a couple of years ago, just around that time, I was asked by Rabbi Moshe Shwed, who's developing the All Parsha app, do you want to do a Parsha? And I said, wow, there's an opportunity to do the Netziv. Maybe I'll do it while my father's, during the year of Avelis. I'll do something. And Baruch Hashem, I was able to take my father's understanding of the Netziv and bring in my own neo-Hasidic approach a little bit, but really to try and share some more Torah of the Netziv. So it's been a chavrusa with my dad, and an incredible deepening of my relationship with my father after he was nifter. That has really been wonderful for me. And the words of Netziv, you pointed it out. It's really amazing. You know, he had a special love for Rav Kook. I think he referred to Rav Kook as an Eved Hashem, you know, and it was a very unique sort of, as we've mentioned, title. And so the connection of the Netziv and his Torah, maybe on the one side to the Rav, because they were also family, they're also mishpacha, and to the other side Rav Kook, and to that sort of mentality and approach, you see a breadth and a depth of a personality in Torah that really inspires me every single week, and to the extent that it's listened to, that people are benefiting from it. I'm happy to keep working on it. It's still a thing. There is no English translation of the Hamikdavar. To the best of my knowledge, the most extensive translations are still sitting in my father's files, and he never, unfortunately, got sick and was nifter, so he was never able to finish it off. I joke with my brother that we should retire and create the machon for the Netziv and start translating everything and getting it out there. But I think I'll have to wait a little bit more. So in the meantime, this is the pathway. And do you have a favorite Netziv or one that's especially relevant to our conversation that you want to share? So look, not to be trite, but the Netziv's introduction to Sefer Bereshis, which is one of his most famous pieces on Chumash, is referring to it as the Sefer HaYashar, and why it's referred to as that. And you think about business, right? Why refer to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov as Yesharim? Why that term? Because first and foremost, they represented and they presented a sort of integrity, of a wholeness of who they are in their relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu and in everything that they did. There's a famous quote about integrity, that it's the most important thing to have, and when you can fake that, you do pretty well, right? So I don't mean it in that sense, but like, if you can be internally and externally, tocham kevarim, the same person, and you show that to people, and you're genuine, and if you're that way in business and transactions, if you're that way in management with people, and say, look, the look on my face that I'm not happy with you, I'm not happy with you. We need you to do better. And here's the way to do it, and here's how I'm helping you to do it, as opposed to somebody, an employee, looking at you and saying, hey, right? And nenuiti kitmol shilshom, right? What's the exact language that Yaakov Avinu turns to his wives? Lavan's not looking at me the same way, right? And not knowing that insecurity. Yaakov Avinu, everything had to be yasher, like, tell me this straight. And we know sometimes there are people who can be too straight, but that notion of Sefer Yesharim, that we can learn, that we can have these role models, I think that's something that is important for all of us to take away, and should underline everything we do, whether we're in business, whether we're in Avodas HaKodesh, to try and align our internal mission in terms of relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu with our external actions in everything we do. And to the extent that we can have that mission fulfillment and that mission alignment, I think that's where the Netziv is pointing us. I love that, and I think that one of the things that we're trying to do here at Stark Tank is to really, as we talked about before, like the Shabbos table talk. So like, who are our role models? And if we take, Balabatim, who managed to create a synergy, to create a wholesome life of Torah and business and values and Tochel Kabaro, and really make them our role models and really maybe bring that into the forefront more. Obviously, we respect our Rabbanim and they're our leaders and they give us the Dvar Hashem, but this other sort of form of leadership and mentorship and role modelship, which represents the idea of the Yashrus of the Avos, doing all the things that they did in the actual world, but also struggling with their values and trying to stay strong. So that's something that we're trying to do here, and so that really resonates a lot. So it was a great conversation, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. And look, and to the extent that there's anything to end on, right? As always, it's a long-term conversation. We have an opportunity in every single thing we do to be Mekadosh Shem Shemayim. And how do we do that? If we are focused on the Borei Olam, if we're focused on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, on trying to do what we're doing and aligning it with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then we know we have a shot of going in the right direction. We're gonna make mistakes. We're gonna fail. We're gonna go in different directions, right? And we should have people around us who help us, right? The chevra, the right family, whatever it is, to help us stay aligned. And if we can outline for ourselves, where do we want to go? What's our strategic plan? Our personal strategic plan. Where are we heading? What are our goals? How often do people look ahead 5 years, 10 years and say, this is where I want to go in Limud Torah. This is where I want to be in a family. This is where I want to live. This is how much money I need to make. Right? Whatever it is. Okay, so how do I get there? What are the steps? And I think, beginning with the first lines in the Shulchan Aruch of like, how do you tie your shoes in the morning? Right shoe, left laces, right laces. Every single thing can be a moment and an opportunity to tie us forward with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if we can do that, and we can remind ourselves, then you're going to align your business practices, you're going to align your management, you're going to align whatever it is that you're doing, you're going to be a Mentch. And that's the great opportunity that we have. So thank you for letting me to share that.
Thank you.